Ma'am, calm down or you'll have to leave.
I need my medicine now. I can't wait anymore.
To understand the full weight of what happened on January 12, 2026, you need to understand who was sitting in that plastic chair. Judge Eleanor Hayes, 68, was not just any patient. She was a federal district court judge for the Northern District of Georgia, appointed in 2012 by President Obama, confirmed by the Senate, and for 14 years the presiding authority on some of the most consequential civil rights cases in the American South. Before the bench, she spent 18 years in the trenches, first as a public defender in Fulton County, then as a senior attorney for the ACLU of Georgia, where she won landmark settlements against discriminatory policing. Her clients were people the system had already decided didn't matter. Young black men stopped without cause, women jailed for minor infractions they couldn't afford to bond out of, elderly residents subjected to no-knock raids at the wrong address. Her former law clerk, Danielle Osei, put it this way. She'd quote Graham v. Connor like it was scripture, not to show off, but because she genuinely believed that the rules protecting people from excessive force were the most important lines ever written in American law. Her colleagues described her as unflappable, measured, never seeking special treatment. On the morning of January 12, that reputation would be tested in ways no courtroom ever had. That detail matters more than it might seem at first. Judge Eleanor Hayes woke at her home in Decatur, Georgia, sometime before dawn, with chest pain radiating down her left arm, the cardinal warning sign of a cardiac event. She did not call 911. She did not wake a neighbor. She did not call her daughter. She got dressed, a light blue button-down shirt, slacks, sensible shoes, and she drove herself to Memorial General Hospital's emergency room, arriving at 5:45 a.m. Why alone? People who knew her offered the same answer. She was fiercely private, and she had a lifelong instinct not to make herself a burden. Eleanor would apologize for interrupting you even if you were the one who knocked on her door, one colleague recalled. At triage, she checked in quietly, presented her insurance card, and sat down to wait. The triage nurse's notes, later entered into evidence, confirmed her vitals were elevated but stable. She was categorized as urgent but non-critical, meaning she was in real distress, but others were more immediately life-threatening. In a packed urban ER at 6 in the morning, that meant she would wait, and wait, and wait. For nearly 4 hours, she sat in that plastic chair, sipping water from a paper cup, occasionally checking her watch. No outbursts, no demands, just a 68-year-old woman with a heart condition, sitting alone in fluorescent light, trying to be patient about a body that was running out of it. This is the part of the story most coverage skips over. It shouldn't. At 09:47 a.m., hospital security contacted Atlanta PD. Sergeant Marcus Reed was already in the building. He'd been called earlier for an unrelated disturbance in a different wing. A nurse flagged him down near the main waiting area. The complaint, as recorded, agitated patient disrupting the waiting area. No specific crime alleged, no weapon mentioned, no physical altercation, no threat, just an agitated patient. What the internal investigation later revealed is deeply uncomfortable. The nurse who flagged security had had a brief exchange with Hayes about wait times just minutes earlier. Hayes had raised her voice, not screamed, raised it, when told she would need to wait longer for medication. She had said, according to at least 2 bystander accounts, something to the effect of, "I have been here since before dawn with chest pain. This is not acceptable." That was the disturbance. The investigation also surfaced a question no one wanted to ask directly. Would the same call have been made if the patient raising their voice had been younger, or white, or male? The DOJ's pattern and practice review found that in 3 similar incidents in Atlanta area hospitals between 2023 and 2025, police had been summoned for agitated patients. All 3 were black women over the age of 50. None of the calls had resulted in arrests when the officer actually assessed the situation on arrival. In Hayes' case, it would be different. Patrol Sergeant Marcus Reed, 42, had been with Atlanta PD for 16 years. His assignment, patrol and crowd control. He was not a crisis intervention officer. He had not completed advanced de-escalation training specific to medical environments because at the time of the incident, Atlanta PD had no such requirements for officers responding to hospital calls. His disciplinary record, obtained through public records requests following the incident, showed 2 prior complaints for excessive force, one in 2019, one in 2022, both of which had been reviewed internally and resulted in no formal action. A third complaint, filed in 2023 by a nursing home staff member, alleged that Reed had been unnecessarily confrontational with an elderly resident who had wandered into a hallway. That complaint was closed as unsubstantiated. In other words, the officer dispatched to handle an elderly woman with a heart condition in a hospital waiting room had a documented history of complaints involving elderly and medically vulnerable individuals. And under Atlanta PD policy at the time, that history was invisible to any supervisor not actively reviewing his file. Reed arrived at Hayes' location at 9:52 a.m. He did not speak to the nurse who had made the call. He did not review any triage notes. He walked in, spotted a woman standing at her walker, voice raised, and made a determination. When the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division opened its pattern or practice investigation following Hayes' case, they didn't start from scratch. They had a file. 3 incidents between 2023 and 2025 had already flagged a troubling pattern, police being summoned to Atlanta area hospitals for agitated patients, all Black women over 50 with no specific crime alleged, no weapon involved, and no prior assessments by hospital mental health staff. In all 3 prior cases, the responding officer had either issued a verbal warning and left or made an arrest for disorderly conduct that was later dismissed. None had gone to force. Hayes' case was the 4th, and it was the first time an officer pulled a weapon. The national picture. The numbers behind cases like this are not abstract. According to research by Reuters and Amnesty International published in 2024, adults over 60 are among the fastest growing demographics experiencing taser deployments by law enforcement in the United States. Between 2015 and 2023, at least 49 people over the age of 60 died in the United States following taser use, 22 of whom had documented cardiac conditions at the time of deployment. The medical literature is unambiguous. Electrical shock in patients with pre-existing arrhythmia or cardiac disease carries substantially elevated risk of ventricular fibrillation. It is, in plain terms, potentially fatal in a way it is not for younger, healthy subjects. Reed's training file showed 0 hours of instruction on taser use with medically vulnerable populations. That was not a personal failure, it was a departmental one. Atlanta PD had no such training requirements in 2026. This is the question that never fully went away. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation's conclusion, unreasonable but not criminally reckless, is one of the most legally loaded phrases in the entire case. It describes the narrow but real gap between civil liability and criminal culpability in use of force law. Under Georgia's criminal code, a charge of aggravated assault by a police officer requires proving that the officer acted with criminal intent, not merely poor judgment, not merely recklessness, but a conscious disregard for the substantial risk of serious harm. The GBI determined that Reed's actions, while plainly unjustified, did not meet that bar. He believed, however unreasonably, that he faced a threat. That subjective belief, even when objectively wrong, is a shield against criminal prosecution that American courts have consistently declined to remove. Civil rights attorneys called it the immunity gap, the standard that protects people from police misconduct and the standard that puts officers in prison were not designed to cover the same ground. Hayes understood this better than almost anyone. It was, after all, a gap she had spent her career trying to close. After his termination, Reed gave a brief written statement through his attorney. "I made a split-second decision under stress. I regret the outcome." He gave no interviews. He did not attend congressional hearings. He moved to private security work in a suburb of Atlanta. His attorney later filed an appeal of his termination, arguing that the department's inconsistent enforcement of its own use of force policies made the dismissal punitive rather than remedial. That appeal is pending. It would be easy and inaccurate to treat Reed as simply a villain. He is also a product of a department that for years received his complaints, filed them, and moved on. A product of training systems that never taught him what to do when the person in front of him was 68, had a walker, and was in a hospital because her heart was failing. A product of a culture in which calling a situation under control, however badly you handle the situation, is a career-saving move. None of that excuses what he did. All of it explains how it was allowed to happen. She went back to work. After a brief medical leave, her cardiac condition had, in fact, required treatment. She was eventually diagnosed with unstable angina and underwent a procedure in February 2026. Judge Hayes returned to the Northern District bench. She recused herself from her own lawsuit, which was reassigned to Judge Patel in the Middle District, and she continued to hear cases. She donated $1 million of the settlement to the Southern Center for Human Rights, specifically earmarked for police accountability litigation in Georgia. She donated $500,000 to Grady Memorial Hospital's Cardiac Care Fund for low-income patients, the patients most likely to end up in an ER waiting room with no one to advocate for them. In December 2026, she sat for a rare extended interview on PBS. She was asked whether she had forgiven Sergeant Reed. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, she was asked what she would say to the nurse who made the call. Here is the uncomfortable truth at the center of this story. Judge Eleanor Hayes, one of the most legally sophisticated people in the country, with 32 years of experience navigating exactly these systems, could not stop what happened to her. She cited the right case law, she produced her credentials, she did everything right, and she still ended up on a linoleum floor with handcuffs on. So the question is not what should she have done differently. The question is, if it can happen to her, what chance does anyone else have? What chance does the 45-year-old black man in a different hospital waiting room have who doesn't know what Graham versus Connor means? What chance does the immigrant grandmother have who doesn't speak English and can't explain that she's not a threat, she's just scared? What chance does the unhoused veteran have who's learned from experience that any interaction with police ends the same way regardless of what he says? Judge Hayes' case changed Atlanta's policies. It generated a federal investigation. It produced a $2.8 million settlement. And still, no criminal charges. Still, the officer's appeal is pending. Still, somewhere, right now, in a hospital waiting room in some American city, someone is being categorized as a disturbance instead of a patient. The body cam footage doesn't end when Hayes hits the floor. The real footage, the one that matters, is everything that came before the red dot appeared on her chest. The 4 hours of silence, the nurse picking up the phone, the dispatcher sending a patrol sergeant instead of a social worker, the sergeant who decided he was the last word in that room. That's the footage we all need to watch.